Hello everyone and welcome back to The Process. Today we're looking at Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse with co-director Kemp and editor Mike Andrews.
Hey everybody, my name is Kemp Powers. Welcome to The Process. I am one of the three directors of Sony's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and I'm so pleased to be here today for a conversation with our amazing editor, Mike Andrews. Hey Mike.
Cam, how you doing? Long time no
Good.
see.
It's good to see you twice this week. Mike and I were both Mike is still in Savannah for the SCAD Film Festival. That was a good time, man.
I have family in Savannah. My mother's there. I'm in my mother's house. I don't live with my mother. I live in LA. I'm staying here for the week. But I popped by the SCAD Film Festival and got to see you and the other directors and Phil, and it was fantastic to see you guys. It's been a while.
You'll be happy to know that I just a few minutes ago put in an order for them for Birds cookies from Savannah. I got hooked. I put in an order for all these, so I'm about to put some weight back on in the coming weeks.
My mother's been setting those for 30 years to me. So, yeah, I'm very familiar.
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy to have this convo with you, man. I mean, that's because I have to say one of my favorite parts of the filmmaking process is the time spent in edit. And for those unfamiliar, I mean, edit is really where all of this incredible material, footage, music, sound is all assembled together, and we get to see our movie. And for a lot of the process, our lack of a movie. So, that's in many ways. True. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of almost like where the magic happens, so to speak.
It's definitely the room where it happens.
Yeah,
it definitely is.
Yeah,
one way or the other.
Yeah. What made you decide to become an editor?
The shortest version of this I could probably give is I didn't plan on it. I knew I wanted to be in film. But when I went to film school, I didn't know what exact aspect. So I was kind of feeling it out. Do I want to be a writer? Do I want to be a DP? Do I want to direct? Do I want to edit? And I would say edit was at the bottom of that list.
Really?
And people were sort of like steering me away from it. People like go, you don't want to do editing. You're stuck in a room all day with people like talking over your shoulder. And I was like, okay, well, so I was kind of like turned off to the idea, probably, just because of the opinions of other people. And I should have given it a fair chance.
Right.
But when I got out of school, I was a PA and I was on sets in Chicago for features and commercials. And I have to say, being on a set is a very intense experience, and it's a very different world. And
intense good or intense bad for you?
Well, as a PA, it's bad. You're at the you're the one doing all the the worst possible jobs imaginable, and you're running around getting coffee and doing all these things, and it was and people can be pretty harsh in the live action world like that.
Yeah.
And when I ended up moving out of Chicago, moved to LA, I enrolled at UCLA, and I knew two people in LA, and they happened to be people that worked in animation. There was a husband and wife team. The husband was the guy who drew the Aha video, and he
Take on Me.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. And they were making music videos. So my first entry into even working in the industry was through them into animation, even though I wasn't even dead set on animation. So I helped them on, the Paul Abdul video, Opposites Tract, and the Scat Cat videos with the animated cats. And I was cell painting, and I was running all over town. And I was getting all this freelance work from animators, and we were bringing it back to this little house on Larchmont that we were working on. And I was using it's funny because I learned film and editing on film in school, but the moment I got out of school, film was practically dead. And so we were using, and we had an upright Moviola, which I used for the first time, but we also had these fantastic little computers called Amigas. They were Commodore Amigas.
I remember the Commodore Amiga. Oh my God.
It was an amazing machine for the time, especially for like video and stuff.
Yeah.
So we were using that to run pencil tests, and that was like our Avid basically at the time, and so I got used to using that. And the company that was like, animation, well, we can't afford this takes too long. Some people that get into animation don't know what they're in for, and then they get in and they go, holy cow, this is long and expensive. So they bailed out of that and didn't want to do any more animated music videos. And they wanted me to, the producer said, can you call the company across the street and see if they want to buy our Amiga? So I called the company across the street, didn't know who they were, what it was. And I said, do you want to buy this Amiga? And the guy said, do you know how to use it? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, we'll hire you. And so I went across the street because it was kind of like new to the industry. And that happened to be the company was Spunko, who was making the Ren and Stimpy
Ren and
show.
Stimpy, right,
Yeah.
of course.
So that was my first foray into like cutting, story reels. And in television, it's much different. Like you're cutting they call them animatics, which is a word that I kind of hate in the feature world because it makes it sound like we just do this one task and then we pass it along to editors down the line. But in features, it's different. You carry it all the way through. In television, you cut these story reels, they ship it somewhere to be animated. The animation comes back, and then that goes just to an online editor who does basically assemble. Mm-hmm. So I started to learn how to cut story and comedy, and from there I just bounced around through television. So getting into the industry was just sort of like kind of falling backwards into this role that I wasn't even really planning on, but I knew that it suited me. And and everyone that I encountered, including my teachers from college, always say, "Wow, your editing is what's really kind of standing out in your work."
Spider Woman.
Me too. Are you,
Oh, this? We don't know the sex yet. My husband wants it to be a surprise. He's really corny, but so hot.
Will you adopt me?
What?
What?
Guys, can we focus on the big fire-breathing threat to time and space, please?
Yep. Where'd you go to school?
Well, I started at the University of Texas and I finished at the University of Iowa. I bounced around a little bit, and I did some film classes at the Columbia College in Chicago while I was living there. And then I came to LA and enrolled in UCLA graduate school for animation.
Okay, so like you said, your teachers were saying that like you seem to have like a predilection to editing. Were there certain skill set? Like what were the skills that made you kind of like predisposed to being an editor? I'm just kind of curious what you think those are.
I mean, it's kind of like a sense of timing and a sense of, building your story around, the beats as they play. And it was always just sort of like an intuitive process for me. So it's hard for me to even like examine what I did. But I felt like there was a very, naturalistic flow to the way I would cut things. And people always told me there was, an elegance to what I did that, they wouldn't see with other people where things might be a little more stilted. And so, I mean, these are just responses that I got because I'm sort of unable, I can't be objective enough to know what I'm doing, but that's what people would tell me. And they back in the television days, they used to do these storyboards, and the directors would sit there with a stopwatch and they would time them. And at first I was just looking at these panels going, okay, he wants this on there for a second. He wants this on there for 2 seconds. And it was maddening. It was just crazy. Like, how can you time something like that without even just pushing play and feeling it and seeing it? And one time the director didn't have time to turn that in. So I just cut it myself and with my own intuition. And when he saw it, he said, well, you're doing this from now on. You really like what I did. So, one thing leads to another. You just jump around from studio to studio. I ended up at DreamWorks, and that's when I got into feature. Mm-hmm. Shrek was actually the first feature I worked on as a second editor.
Wow.
And then Shrek 2 was the first feature I worked on as a lead editor. And then I was there for 20 years and just...
So has it always been animation? Have you cut much in live action at all, or?
In the sense of hybrids. I have done
Okay.
live action. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was just curious. I did want to ask, like, what you thought, if any, were some of the differences between cutting live action and animation. Like,
I mean, there are differences, but there are so many similarities at the same time. You know, people never understand what I do for a living. I'm constantly trying to explain to people what I do for a living. People go, "What do you just cut shots together that are already animated?" I don't get it, you know. And I'm constantly telling them, well, there's a, you know, you sort of know what live action editing is, I assume, and sometimes they don't even get that either. And I talk to live action editors, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry about it. They don't understand what I do either." But essentially, you have pre-production, production, post-production, live action. You're generally involved in post-production. You know, sometimes it bleeds earlier, depending. Our job in animation as editors, we're on from the get-go. We're on from day one. We're on for pre-production. We're on for production, and we're on for post-production. Post-production is actually the most minor aspect of our job because it's only the last couple months as we're putting the film together.
Right.
Pre-production is the most important aspect of our job because that's all the story phase, and we're building the movie from scratch. And
I don't think people realize that like, I think when they hear an editor in animation, I think they might wrongly assume that you were cutting together completed animated shots. And in actuality, and I think it's important to point this out to people, our editors, people like you, are cutting it together starting in 2D storyboards.
Right.
With scratch voice acting.
Yes.
So we're making versions of the film in 2D storyboard. And as things are working their way through production, they are dynamically dropping into the edit suite. So often the first time as a director, I'm seeing some new element that's been completed is when a shot pops up in the edit that's like, oh my God, this is animated now. And one of the first things that often pops into our mind is like, oh man, now it doesn't work. Like conceptually it worked in 2D storyboards. And then we see it in a rough 3D version and go like, oh, well, that's different. And it kind of causes us to.
Yeah, you have to watch it every step of the way. And we were lucky enough on this movie to be able to still operate on story all the way through, even through production. Like we could actually change more things than you normally would. Like most studios try to lock you down, but I think we had a little more. Phil and Chris have a little more power, and and that's how they like to work, and then we have to all kind of roll with that. And it's what works about their system of filmmaking, and
let's talk about that a little bit because it's a two-part question. Let me just ask the first question, which is like, what interested you in coming onto this film? Because we'd already been on, obviously we've been working on the film for a little bit. I remember the day when we first met and sat down and had our little interview, and I'm going to ask a question about that in a bit. But but like, what interested you in jumping onto Spider-Verse?
It's funny because I saw the first one and I was blown away, and I was kind of like crushed in a way because I was like, gosh, I know Peter Ramsey, I know Bob Persichetti, I know Christina Steinberg. Why didn't they ask me? So I was like, God, that's a party I wanted to go to. That was a party I wished I was at. You know, and I knew there was going to be a second one, but it was like, I was in the middle of working on another movie. I was working at another studio.
Right.
I had made no effort to try to work on it, and I didn't really know the time frame or anything that was going on. And then I got a call from Christina Steinberg, who I had worked with at DreamWorks before, and she said, you guys had been working for about a year.
Yeah.
Things were, kind of building off the ground in early stages, and their editor was leaving, and she asked me if I wanted to come on board. And I happened to be on a project that I didn't choose to be on. I was on a project that I sort of, because of COVID and things, I fell into and was asked to stay on this project to help out after they lost their editor. So it wasn't something I was passionate about to begin with. so I left that studio and I jumped ship. You know, I spent one weekend thinking about it.
Yeah.
I said, Christina, give me just the weekend to think about it. And I watched the first one again.
Mm-hmm.
I watched 21 Jump Street
Oh, right on.
and 22 Jump Street.
Mm-hmm.
And to be perfectly honest with you, those movies actually made me want to do the movie more than even Spider-Verse, because
Okay.
I got such a great vibe from, you know, the Lord Miller experience.
Mm.
I was like, there's something about these guys' movies that are different. Like there's something very unique about their movies. And I was having trouble tapping into what it was. How do they make these movies that, even though you're making a movie about a TV show from the 80s or whatever it is, like I never even had seen those movies, because I always wrote them off as like, oh, it's just a remake of 21 Jump Street. I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
Made by animation dudes, forget it. You know, and so I rejected them. So when I finally saw them, I was like, I was blown away. They were so funny, so original.
Wait, you saw those films the first time after we had a conversation? You hadn't seen them before at all?
I think you're right. Because did I meet you? I must have met you. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, because I remember my first, meeting with you before you came on board. I mean, one thing I remember was like thinking like, wow, I really hope this guy agrees to edit our film. But not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. But like, what were some of the things you thought when you first met the directing team? You know what I mean? Because like that, obviously you had to make an assessment, having a conversation with me and Joaquin Dos Santos and Justin K. Thompson, the other two directors. I'm just kind of curious how that was for you.
Yeah, and of course that was mid-COVID, so we all met over Zoom.
Over Zoom,
and,
right.
First impressions, I would say, like I thought JDS was a super cool dude with his cap on backwards, and he was a storyboard artist. And at the time, I had no idea that I was speaking to one of the greatest storyboard artists I've ever
of all
met.
time. Yes,
honest to God, I could count 5 people on one hand that I think are on even close to his level, and he still might be at the top.
Yeah.
Justin, he was the production designer on the first movie. His work speaks for itself right there.
Yeah.
You had come up with Soul, and you were so cool and laid back in that meeting. And I was like, God, I like these guys already. But and Soul is, I'm going to be honest, I'm not the biggest Pixar fan in the world.
Oh, no offense taken.
I spent 20 years at DreamWorks, and we were always competitive.
But, that's right. That's right. You were their enemy.
But Soul was my favorite Pixar movie to date.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't think I ever told you that. I love Soul.
Oh man, that's awesome, dude.
And I hope I have a question about Soul, but I don't know where's. Probably not supposed to talk about Soul, but I always wanted to ask you something about it, but maybe we'll get to it.
All right, we'll continue that offline.
But you guys were all, very, very cool up front. Like, and we started talking about. Oh, I had watched the first act because we started talking about the first act.
Right.
And you guys want to know my opinions about the first act, and I immediately started giving opinions that were very in sync with things that you guys were talking about. And I think I could tell immediately, like, you guys were like nodding your heads and going, yeah, okay, we're good. Yeah. And it all felt like we were kind of on the same page.
Yes.
And then you guys pitched me the rest of the movie that I hadn't seen. Like the first act only takes us up to India.
Yes.
And you pitched me the rest. And this goes, even beyond our movie. And it was, I kind of started to like shrink in my seat and go, oh my God, this thing is a monster.
Yeah.
This is a big project. This is a large scale project with so many characters and so many sets and so much design work. And I mean, it was daunting. Truly.
Yeah. I mean, look, the reality is, I mean, I can't speak for other people, but making Across the Spider-Verse is definitely one of the most unique filmmaking experiences I've ever had, just because of the disparate parts of the film itself, the disparate voices. I mean, we have such a huge, crew, and so much input coming from so many different people, which kind of leads me into another question, which is like, what were some of even though you worked in animation all these years, what were some of the unique challenges that this film presented to you as an editor?
That's an amazing question. It's I have worked on challenging movies. Shrek 2 was very challenging to make. I worked on another movie called Megamind that was extremely challenging to make, and we did that. The only reason, like at the wrap party, Chris Miller came up to me and said, "This had to be the hardest movie you've ever worked on." and I said, "No, I think there's one that was actually harder, but it was only because of our time frame. Like we had less time, so I did all nighters on that movie. I didn't do all nighters on this movie, And this movie was actually reasonable. I felt like I put a lot of time into it. I put but it was I was never at a physical breaking point like I was on Megamind, where I had walking pneumonia and I still had to work. That was a crazy experience. This movie, of course, there's 3 directors. There's Phil and Chris. Phil and Chris bring in a lot of friends for opinions, and they run they have Lindsay Duran coming in with her commentary. So you have to spin a lot of plates, and that's what it always felt like. One of those old Johnny Carson guys running around spinning plates. I felt like there was a lot going on at once, and that was definitely more widespread than I'm used to on movies. I'm used to having it a little more funneled down to my room and closer knit group, working on everything. But I had 2 associates, Andy Levitin and Chet Hoffman. They would go off and work, with one of you guys and work on dialogue or work on a different scene. And so things were always kind of cycling around and coming back through the room. So that was probably the most challenging thing for me that I hadn't really experienced, where, there's a lot going on all around you and you're just maintaining this whirlwind.
Will you get out of here? No! Gotcha! Clear the building!
I'm just going to ask straight up, why does the Avid crash so much?
Wow.
Like seriously, what is up with the editing hardware, and why is it so damn unreliable, especially in moments when it's like the Avid's crashed again.
I'm gonna tell you one little story from this movie. My entire existence on these movies comes in these ebbs and flows of screenings, right? Like screenings are the goals. Like you have like maybe a 6 to 8 week goal before you get to your next screening. So like sometimes there's a tiny little lull as you reboot a little bit, and then you head for your next screening, and then the last 3 weeks before the next screening is just you're not going to get a weekend. You're not going to get a lot of time at night. It's a big push to get there, and it seems like during that time everything that could go wrong goes wrong, like technically speaking. And there's been many times where we're in the middle of it and it crashes, and I mean every time it crashes, this thing comes up and says, "Do you want to send this note to Abbott that it crashed?" And I'm like, "Yes, let them know." I don't know if anybody even does anything with that, but you would think they would have it down by now. Indeed, right. So one little story, that we were in the theater. Remember, like after we started coming back, and I met you for the first time, and I was
in person. Yes,
surprised how tall you were.
Yeah, I know that surprises people. Zoom for some reason makes me look shorter. People don't realize I'm a 6-footer.
Yeah, and then we went into the. I said, well, let's go in the theater because we can spread out, and I can work from the Avid right there in the theater, and it's great. And that was nice because we could have a lot of people in there. There's always multiple voices going on, right? So we were working. I think we had a screening on Monday, and we were working on a Friday, and we were doing all the last minute changes, and then everyone was supposed to leave me alone for the weekend to do some mixing to make it presentable, and then we show it on Monday to a preview audience. So it's high pressure. It's a lot on me and my team to make it as presentable as possible because we're trying to make storyboards play as if you're watching a movie on the big screen, and you have to hit it with sound and music and make it full rich experience. And we were working on one of the most crucial scenes in the movie, which I wanted to ask you about it later. But it's the scene between Miles and his mom under the water tower.
Right.
And we were reworking that and trying to make that as emotionally powerful as we could. Because Luna had given us such a great performance, and it was just a matter of like adding the right pauses. Who are we on at the right time? Are we on Miles while she's speaking to see his reaction? Are we on her during her line? So there was a lot of debating of that, and we had storyboards. Storyboards allow you to just sort of experiment and switch things around and see where we're at. And we got it to this magical place where everyone was happy, and I pushed play, and we were celebrating. We were so happy, and everyone left, and that was the last thing we did. At the end of the night, I knew I had to come in the next morning and mix the movie. I left. I came back the next morning, and the cut was gone. And I've never panicked so hard in my life. And I was like, wait a minute. The last save for the reel was at like 6 p.m., but we were working on it till like 9:30 p.m. Where is it? Why didn't anything save after 6:30? So not only does the Avid not crash, having crash all the time, sometimes it fools you into thinking you're saving your work when you weren't.
It's not.
And it was a hard lesson that I learned. Some error had popped up. I mean, I guess I'll have to take some blame because some error popped up, and things pop up all over the place, and I'll ignore them, but I probably shouldn't. I think I just like get that out of my way and turned it off. And I think it was warning me that something was wrong. Like there was some glitch. Usually the error messages are illegible. They're just gobbledygook. You don't know what it even means.
Yeah.
I just sort of ignore them. But I think it was trying to tell me that you should probably reboot,
Yeah.
So when I came back the next day, I had to rebuild that scene. And
now I'm remembering that moment. Yeah, I know.
I was devastated. I was like, oh my God. So I worked on it, and I managed to get it back to what it was. And we even sent it into production. And I think I was like, God, I hope this is what it was. And we screened it, and it went well, and everybody was happy. And that's what instigated putting that scene into production, because it did play so well.
Yeah.
But there was one thing that slipped through the cracks. And I remembered it too late. And it got the animation, and I went, oh shit. I had this recall from that moment, and I heard one of your voices in the back of my head going, don't cut to the side shot, the profile of the two of them until this one particular moment. And I realized there was one profile shot in earlier, which sort of like broke the flow.
Right.
Over the shoulder. We went to a side, over the shoulder, then we went to the side in this long push, which was beautiful on its own, and it really caught the moment. So I had to beg an animation to redo a shot just to fix that, and thankfully they did.
There was this whole movie was kind of like troubleshooting on the fly could be like the alternate title of like the entire film. And honestly, like hearing you talk, because I'm really into music, and it just dawned on me that like I always think of like other jobs that feel analogous to editors, and in music it's kind of just reminding me, having been around friends who were musicians, to the engineer in the booth. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're when you're making an album, I feel like there's some kind of like temperamental similarities between editors in film and engineers in music, and that, just like, maybe you think that's wrong, but it just occurred to me right now, so don't take offense at that.
I'm not temperamental.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. Like, you guys aren't. That's leading to my question, which is that in my experience, all editors have the world's best poker faces. Like when you hit play, it is impossible to guess what you actually think of the playback. There is a fucking blank stare that you get.
That's funny.
And you're kind of like embarrassed, like, I don't want to ask, like, well, what do you think of it? Because it's like, you're directing it. What, don't you have an opinion? But it's that, like, editor blank, press play, and you're kind of just sitting there. And like, is that a skill you're trained to develop, to like not show any emotion on the playback at all? Because it's almost like I realized I was watching one of the old, like, Wes Anderson movies, Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, and like the editor played him in something, and he was like, "What do you? I think it's pretty good." And the editor was just like that's the lack of emotion throws me. So what's that about?
Well, I could pick up the laptop and we could walk into the other room and we could talk to my mother, and she'll tell you about the lack of emotion that's not allowed in the family, right? I'm sure part of it's growing up, in a Midwestern home with parents from that generation. But yeah, I mean, Phil always like made fun of me because he always said, "You're so stoic."
Yeah.
But
it's not just you. Every editor I've ever known has been
really?
very, very stoic. It's actually like, I thought it was an editor thing.
There must be something to that. I can't explain, but there must be something to that these personalities end up in that role.
Yeah.
There must be some psychological connection. You're probably pretty right. Yeah. But
it's just I noticed.
I definitely give my opinion, but I definitely do hold back at first, and I don't want to I want to feel the room. I want to go, I want to let the cut speak for itself for a moment and let it breathe. And I don't like jump in right away and go, "Hey, that was a piece of shit," right, guys?
Yeah, of course. I mean, one of the things I really did love about working with you, and honestly, it made all of our lives so much easier, was you had really great instincts when pulling together rough assemblies. The first time you look at a new sequence, it can be, sometimes it's going to be disastrous no matter what, because it just,
right.
But that, and some people, every person works differently, but we tended to work, newsflash, in a way that it was always helpful to the process to have you pull together, rough assemblies. So it'd be great to hear you. This is a segment called The Process. It'd be great to hear you kind of talk about your process for pulling together rough assemblies. And it also begs a second question, which is like, do you have any aspirations to direct yourself? Because pulling together these rough assemblies is, you know what I mean? There's a bit of a skill, like there's an overlap between what the editor is doing and what the director is doing. So I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, as far as like the process part of it goes, Phil always used to say something very funny, like when he'd watch a scene, he would, he got very used to the way I worked, and he got very used to seeing how like the before and the after of like something that I hadn't touched yet, and then I touched, and then I showed it to him, and so he could see the difference too. And he used to always, he had this phrase of like, "Oh, just go mic it up," and he he didn't want to sit there and like, go through every shot and talk about every time. He just knew that like I would get it to some level. And I've always said, like, our job is really to make your guys' job easier, and not make you sit there and be tortured by, frame fucking every little shot, and when I look at a sequence and it's playing stilted or rough, and I just kind of go in and I give it a more natural flow. I give it break up the timing. So some things are, quicker and some things are faster. Something, cutting storyboards. I know a lot of people fall into this trap of making it a little too even timing wise. And it's really crucial, especially with storyboards to break it up so you get this zippier feel to it at times, or slow it down when it's necessary. So, a lot of that involves like pre-lapping dialogue and overlapping dialogue and, just giving it some zip. It's a matter of flow. And I always try to like trim things up to within an inch of their life. It's hustle and flow.
Yeah.
So and people have told me like, I've come on to movies where an editor was either let go or they left, and then the new director has to adapt to my work, and they look at it and they go, oh, okay. I feel like one, I won't name the director, but he said, oh, before I felt like rhythmically, talk about music, it's like rhythmically, the last editor was kind of like, dun, 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 dun. And he said, you come in with this sort of like, you're more jazzy, I guess,
Yeah. I was going to say, that seems like a jazz reference, right?
Yeah. He did. He said that. You're like more like jazz, and they're just sort of like keeping the rhythm, and that's what I sort of try to bring to it. It's just a feel, but also like a focus on each story beat and making it play as, if it's a action sequence, make it play for action. That's something about animation is like almost every animated movie, you got to be able to cut action, you got to be able to cut comedy, you got to be able to cut heart, and heart's most crucial. And like that scene we mentioned before between Miles and his mom, that scene made me well up. I know you don't think I'm emotional, but every time,
no, I didn't say you weren't emotional. I just said you have a good poker face, dude. Like every
time I watch that scene, I welled up, and like I'm sure it affected you too, because your son just went to college, and my son was going to college around that time, and I was like,
yeah, dude, I flew to New York to record that scene with Luna in New York. So like a lot of times with a lot of the actors on our film, if they were in LA, we recorded them in person, but if they were remote, we did it over Zoom. But for that in particular, it was like really important to kind of be in the room with Luna. And like she broke down, that was real. Like she broke down into tears doing that scene. And at the end, I don't think I'm betraying her confidence by saying at the end of the scene, she was like, Kemp, can I have a hug? Like I had to like go into the booth and like hug her, because the emotion was real. And we didn't have to like an editing, we didn't have to Frankenstein together that performance.
Right.
It was like every take was different and emotional in different ways.
Yeah.
It almost felt kind of cruel, to be honest, at times, having Luna do this emotional scene again and again and again.
Right.
But she nailed it in a minimal number of takes. It was more like an embarrassment of riches, as I remember.
And it was such a long line.
Yes.
For her to get
it was a speech. Yeah, it was a monologue. It was an incredibly long monologue. Well, actually, second part of the question, directing. Any aspirations?
Well, to be honest, there have been jobs where I felt like I was kind of a ghost co-director as it was. There's something about like the role I fell into where, sometimes the directors were even taken out of editorial, and we're just driving the show between me and the producer. Or there different things have happened over the years where I've sort of had to step into that role, and I've even had to go into different departments and talk to them about things that I normally wouldn't have to. And it's something that I have always desired to do. I think everybody does to some degree. I had a chance to do it at one point. I was asked to do it at one point, and I was developing something that ended up falling apart as the studio fell apart, basically. So I lost that opportunity. But I think, our role as editors is one of the easier pathways to directing, because you really get it, you get filmmaking. But in animation, the path to directing usually comes from story.
Sure, sure.
You
At
know?
least now it does. I don't think that was
Yeah.
always the case. Like, one of the best directors I've met at Pixar, Lee Unkrich, was an
Oh,
editor.
sure.
He
Yeah.
was an editor of Toy Story, actually. So
Right.
it used to be this thing, I think, where there wasn't necessarily a track. It was
Yeah.
more about just like, did you aspire? Did you have a story to tell? And I think the
Yeah.
whole turning it into a track is that's a whole other conversation about like
Right.
who gets to do it.
You and me, it's...
We're the same. In the important ways, you know?
In every other universe, Gwen Stacy falls for Spider-Man. And in every other universe, it doesn't end well.
Well, it's the first time for everything, right?
I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask one more thing, and that's just like, did you have a favorite sequence in the film of all the sequences you worked on, and just like why, like as an editor, like what was it about that sequence that made it like your favorite in the film?
I mean, emotionally, it's the one we talked about with Rio and Miles. Action wise, it's the train chase.
Yes.
I love that scene, and that was incredibly boarded by Joaquin, one of
Yeah.
the directors, and his boards were just so wonderful to cut. But I have to say, like the one scene that I spent the most time on, and I was probably like the most entrenched in from day one. It was like one of the first things I worked on.
Let me guess. I want to see if I guessed right. Guggenheim?
Close.
Okay.
What comes before Guggenheim? The open is, and it's also the shortest sequence in the whole thing. I worked on that. I was working on it on the mix stage. I mean, I was working on that from the very beginning to the mix stage, and it's very much, an editor's playground, that scene, because it's fast cutting and crazy visuals, and and it's all to music and very rapid fire, and it's got narration, and we had a late read.
And it changed a lot. I mean, I think few scenes change as much. I remember early, like years before the film was done, feeling like this scene feels good. I think we got it. And then it got blown up a lot.
That happens a lot.
Yeah. But I mean, that one in particular was kind of like unbelievable how the number of iterations that scene went through.
I mean, every time I, told my edit crew, hey, I'm sending another version of 150, it was called. They just couldn't believe it. Like, you're still working on that thing? What isn't it done? Why isn't it done? But we had to keep changing it story-wise, because, and this was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, like when we first got on the movie, when we first had that interview, you and I both talked about how the first 10 or so minutes of the movie was Miles free, and it was all Gwen. It was Gwen's story, and it was a weird way to start the movie. And I don't think anyone expected it, and I think that's what made it work, and I think that's what made it win. And I think we all sort of had these weird feelings about, like, oh, this is kind of weird. We don't see Miles for the whole first reel, and it's
you worry that people are going to feel like it's not Miles's movie, which it still very much is Miles's movie, but you don't want to do a disservice to the character, at all. And I think we were concerned about that, I think, up until the very end, but a lot of it is, it's really Gwen's story does so much of the table setting for the journey that Miles is going to go on. So, and I think that's, I like to believe that in the end, the reaction of audiences proves out that we did the right thing by holding on to that and using that kind of Gwen table setting intro to Miles's movie, because I don't hear anyone saying that like the movie lost Miles.
And we reached that point with preview audiences, which were so valuable in telling us what was wrong with the movie and what was right with the movie, and we realized, oh, it's actually working, and people are not bothered by that. And I think we did one last pass where we wove enough Miles, hints of Miles into that first reel. You know, she thinks of him a few times. She talks about him in the beginning, and some of those things weren't there for a while, so it did feel a little Miles.
You do actually now in the final version, you do see him when she thinks about him.
Yeah,
there he is.
Times. Yeah.
So that's true. That wasn't really there.
But as you said, Guggenheim was a beast as well.
That was. Well, I know we're out of time, but yeah, this is so delightful, Mike. I mean, again, like I've always told people there's a lot of MVPs on our team, but like you are like one of the MVPs of all the MVPs, and it was really just like such a delight working with you, man. And like, really appreciate everything that you do. So, thank you so much for talking a little bit about your process and what you do.
Right back at you. I really enjoyed every minute with you. You were always like a great voice of reason in the edit room. Like I felt like you were so good at like spotting moments where maybe we were kind of like spinning or going off the rails, and you go, no, guys, you had it. Yeah. You had it before. And, just even the little things, like when we took out, George saying to Gwen,
oh, you don't understand.
You don't understand.
Yeah, I fought for that line so hard because we muted it for a while, and I was like, no, we gotta hear him respond. Like
no, there were so many things that were on the cusp of falling off that shouldn't, that you helped steer us back right on course. So and you were just such a pleasure to be around. You're a lot of fun in the room.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
You made it great.
Thanks, man. Feeling is mutual. Well, thanks everyone for listening. This is Kemp Powers with Mike Andrews for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and this has been The Process.